Okay, now talkie.
Proving the futility of voice for 15 years.
I hate Max.
Okay. Talkie.
Proving the futility of voice for 15 years.
I hate Max.
And then the infinite loop. Talkie.
Proving the futility of voice for 15 years.
Very frustrated with my.
I hate Max.
And then the infinite loop. Talkie. I had to reboot my machine,
Proving the futility of voice.
which ordinarily is not such a terrible thing, but it completely erases all my settings on the video stuff. I had to reboot my machine. I can turn that off now. And so, gotta rearrange everything. Get it just right. Miles Witness Protection Program. They're set. All right, good. We look good there. Close that. Close that. Close that. We are now streamifying. And no one's in the chat room because we didn't announce that we were doing it a day early. Bad host, no cookie.
I have started my recording device.
Oh, yeah, there's that.
Yeah, there's a thing you got to do.
There we go.
All right, I'm now recording. I don't know how this discussion's going to go. You know, we didn't plan it ahead, but we rarely do. So it'll be interesting, I guess, to see what happens. Question mark.
You guys got to lead on this one because I'm just going to be spectating and I don't know what to add, but we'll find out.
Well, you know, I think it'll be more than you realize because even you have been impacted by Star Wars in some way or another, whether you've seen it or not.
Okay.
All right. So, I mean, everything from Taco Bell commercials to, you know, to pop culture references.
Bill Murray riffing on Saturday Night Live. Weird Al, 2 awesome songs.
Okay. So let's get my notes back here where I can see them. Okay, timer links are running. You guys want to pull those out? I'm keeping, like, the way I'll be doing it is there'll be multiple tabs open to the left of my screen, and as one closes, I'll just close it and the next one will pop right back. So that's my plan. But you guys can do it however you want to do it. I'm not the boss of you.
Well, you kind of are because you're the main guy.
I'm just a guy that, I'm not the boss. I'm just a guy that yells a lot. That's not quite the same thing. Okay. Starting, and here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the GeekRant episode 314, 40 Years of the Force, recorded Saturday. Wow. Let me do that again. Let me pause that timer, or reset it. Because it was just rough. It's just rough. All right. One more time. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the GeekRant, episode 314, 40 Years of the Force, recorded Saturday, February 3rd, 2018, and brought to you by Element OP Productions, elementop.com. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the only show on the internet where geeks rant about stuff. Probably not, but I'm going with that. We are recording on a special Saturday episode because tomorrow is the Super Bowl. And yes, I will not be cowed by you, NFL. I will say the words Super Bowl, and I dare you to come get me. But because Miles has plans, and ordinarily I would, except this is the Yawn Bowl for me. I don't care anything about. I've watched less football this season than I have since I've been an adult. I just stopped caring about whiny rich men. I really did. But anyway, because Miles has a party going on tomorrow, we're recording on Saturday, and that doesn't mean anything other than I just thought I'd tell you that. If we're off, that's what I'm going to blame it on. I didn't get that extra 24 hours of prep time.
It's the wrong day.
Yeah, everything's just different.
It's
So,
Super Saturday.
so I just want to begin very quickly. I'm a sucker for Netflix documentaries, and one popped up. I heard about it on a podcast, and it was called Treasures from the Wreck of the Unbelievable. And so it's this excellent documentary about this shipwreck of a Roman era ship. And they dig everything up. And so I watched it. My kids watched it. It was a great experience. We all enjoyed it. Then I was listening to that same podcast like the next episode, and they said, oh, yeah, by the way, that whole thing was a fake. Sorry, I turned you onto that. Turns out it was part of an art exhibit. So all the treasures, quote unquote, that they had brought up were art that this guy had made. And the art exhibit is a fake museum. And the story is this fake discovery. And the documentary was one of the items in the exhibit. So it's very artfully done. It's very creative, but I got sucked in. I'm telling you, go watch Tales from the Wreck of the Unbelievable. It's interesting, but know that it's completely fake. So there you go.
I'm amazed they admitted to it. And normally those things, like, they spin them out as long as they can. Well, and then, there's a big expose, and it's even more good press for.
Yeah, there were several moments in there that I knew were obviously staged. But documentaries do that all the time. They'll take real events and they'll restage them. So it was like, okay, or maybe they just edited that to be dramatic. That moment where they're just about to give up and then they see a flash of something. That doesn't really happen, but editing makes it possible. And then there was one thing at the very end, like just as the credits were rolling, my wife said, "Is that Mickey Mouse?" But it was just like half a frame, and so we all thought, it must not be what it was. Yeah, it's Mickey Mouse covered in coral, as if he'd been buried under the sea for 1,000 years. And so Seth, is this some anime thing? Bunraku?
No, I assume that is how you pronounce it. That's from the Japanese puppet string stuff. But this is actually a movie. If you think Sin City set in Into the Badlands from what was that, TNT or whatever. It's an independent film. It has some high name talent in it, and it was actually a very interesting and enjoyable and a pretty good movie. Actually, Mark, I think this is one you would like because of how it is done. It's almost like it looks a lot like Sin City, but shot in a linear fashion, and the story is cohesive, but it's these stylized, over-the-top colors and actors. And anyway, I started watching and I went, I kind of like this, even though the opening animation makes you think it's going to be this really cheesy, bad movie. But it's sort of like in the same way that opening animation in the last Superman film, how it was done in a very stylized way where you could think, oh my gosh, this is going to be a bad film. But the rest of the movie wasn't like that. That's just kind of how they told the story of Krypton. And This was the same kind of thing. And I think you would actually enjoy it. There is some blood and violence in it, but it's germane to the film. Think of it like a musical, but instead of breaking out into song and dance, they break out into fighting. So it's a fightical instead of a musical. But it was but like I say, it was very enjoyable movie, and I'm glad I watched it. I thought it was done pretty well.
It's like Bruce Lee on Broadway.
Yeah, I don't think you would see it on Broadway, but interesting.
And then Miles, you're making me jealous. You're traveling to see Cirque du Soleil. I love those guys.
Yeah, we went and saw Car in the MGM Grand Theater in Las Vegas. It was almost a spur of the moment thing. Vegas is only a 5-hour drive from Phoenix, and my mother-in-law is staying with us from Australia. She actually goes back next week. So we thought, well, one of those sort of things that she'd really enjoy. So yeah, we jumped in the car and went and saw it. It's the second time I've seen that show. I think I enjoyed it more the second time because I got a chance to really focus in on the detail. But it is an amazing experience. It really is. What they do with that stage and the acrobatics and what looked to me like, parkour meets, I don't know, just lethal stuff that was just happening all about you. Great experience. I recommend that show to anybody.
Awesome. All right, and now so we're going to move on to the discussion part of the show, 40 Years of the Force. This is our geek culture first episode of the month show. And so what I wanted to talk about is Star Wars. Not necessarily the latest movie, although we will talk about that in a spoiler-free fashion, but just the impact that Star Wars has had on culture, on not just American culture, global culture. It is a big thing. Even if you've never seen a single one of the Star Wars movies, you could probably sit down and piece together, tell me some of the major plot points, just because they're all over the place. You know who Luke's dad is, even if you don't know anything else about it. So I just thought it'd be interesting to just dive into that geek culture a little bit. And so this will be interesting because Miles is one of those guys who, am I right, you have never seen any of them?
I saw the first one, but
Okay.
it was in 1970 something.
So you've seen episode 4 only, none of the others.
I think it was just Star Wars when I
Yeah,
saw it.
got it.
I don't. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's it was the Star Wars, the episode 4, A New Hope, was added later. So the original one was just called Star Wars. So you may be absolutely right. When you saw it, it might have just been Star Wars.
Well, yeah, but it starts off episode 4, A New Hope. That's the title. That
Not
starts
in the
scrolling.
original run. That was added later.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
Like within it did its X months run, and then they did the extended run. They added that later. A little bit.
Okay.
It was just Star Wars. But yeah, all in I always remember the episode 4. But apparently, according to people on the internet who specialize in this sort of minutia, there are film reels that were seen that did not include that.
Yeah, I never saw
Wow.
that. I only saw Star Wars.
So I thought I would just break it loosely into a few different sections. The first 3, the ones that we all grew up with. Episode 4 started, so Lucas wrote this big space opera and then took the best parts of the story and decided to make movies out of those. Episode 4, New Hope. Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, and Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. So A New Hope was groundbreaking visual effects, a movie literally like none other. It had never been done before, while at the same time it played with old tropes that hadn't been around forever. And then The Empire Strikes Back, which most people, including myself, think is the pinnacle of the series. It's really where it hit its stride. It's the most drama. It's the best visuals. And then Return of the Jedi, also known as Let's Make Toys, Teddy Bears, and Make Money, came out. So let's just talk about those 3 in themselves. Again, I've already told you my impression. Empire Strikes Back, and I've talked about it before on the show. I rewatch it pretty regularly, and just in terms of lighting and art direction, and getting the best performance out of these previously unknown actors. Right, so they've been through the process before. They're a little seasoned now. Their performances are all stepped up a notch. The direction, Lawrence Kasdan really stepped up and took over from Lucas there, and I just think it's the best of them. But of course, you couldn't get to 5 without having gone through 4. You need to see Luke bullseyeing a womp rat before you could get there. But they changed the world. They introduced an entire generation, our generation, to the space movie. And Kenner Toys literally would not be around today were it not for that movie. It saved that company. Other things, other franchises that now exist probably wouldn't exist. Launched the careers of Harrison Ford and well, really, he's kind of the only one that super benefited from that series, huh? But
Well, no, Mark Hamill did tons of work. He just never had another big breakthrough
Right.
role. But he was in tons of movies in the really all the way up into the 90s. A lot of cheap science fiction movies, actually.
right. Lots of voiceover work. He's best known now
Yes.
for the voice of the Joker. Any
Right.
animated version of the Joker you've ever seen, that was Mark Hamill's voice. Yeah.
He did it very well, that's for sure.
So, Seth, what are your impressions of just the first 3 overall?
Well, I mean, I remember getting the Hoth play set for Christmas. Oh my gosh! And I got tons of action figures. That was so I had and I don't remember what year it was. It must have been right about the time The Empire Strikes Back came out. But I had a Star Wars Christmas, and I didn't tear it up. I wore it out playing with it and playing with those action figures so much. But I loved Star Wars. I didn't like The Empire Strikes Back because I like the good guys to win, but and I don't have the same appreciation as movies on a technical level that you do. But and one thing we haven't talked about yet is how really the whole surround sound and the audio aspects of the theaters, because George Lucas went in to watch it and he was like, it looks great, but it sounds like crap. And so then they developed what THX, and of course, and even that's been surpassed, but the whole emphasis on the audio as well as the visual came out as a result of, we made this great looking movie, but it sounds like you're hearing it on a can through a string. And so really you can credit Star Wars with the movie going experience today. The audio. I remember I went to see the Sean Connery movie with Wesley Snipes,
Rising Sun.
Yeah. And I just remember there was this car scene, and it was like, it was a chase scene, and this Lamborghini just drove across the screen, and you heard it drive across the auditorium. And I was like, oh, that was awesome. And, and that shot and that sound came as a result of the need for innovation that Star Wars showed the movie press as well. So
yeah, prior to that time, not all movie theaters were even in stereo. There was a mono bank of speakers behind the screen, and that was it. I hadn't even thought about that, Seth. That's exactly right. There's an entire, now it's not it may be that would have happened had it not been for Star Wars, but Star Wars and George Lucas pushing it is the first shot across the bow of surround sound and of 3D sound and all of those things. And THX 1138 was a student film that Lucas did when he was enrolled in film school. And so when he had his team create the sound system, they called it THX Sound. It's literally named after a student film that George Lucas did. What a great point there. He's always pushing the envelope, and he was really pushing the envelope in digital stuff. And that brings us to the second three, where every second of every piece of film had some digital element in it, in a time when we weren't quite ready for that technologically. That's true today in most movies, but it's blended to the point that where you can't notice it. In Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, every time you saw something digital, or at least in my case, I went, oh, that's digital. And there was never a moment where I didn't say, oh, that blended into the universe nicely. No, it was just too much, too fast. And I think that's one of the reasons that those movies were so poorly received. Jar Jar Binks was an annoying character, but there were annoying characters all throughout. I don't even want to get started on the Porgs and the new ones. I think the reason, the ham-fisted acting, the bad dialogue, those are all part of the Star Wars genre. I mean, dialogue is bad throughout all the movies. But these were so poorly received, A, because the entire generation of people loved the first ones, and second, they just didn't look right. And I think that's why people revolted against them so much.
Wasn't there like a massive gap between Return of the Jedi and The Phantom Menace in time? I seem to remember it was like 10 years or something between movies. Yeah,
well, it was more than that. It was almost 20 years between. Well, Return of the Jedi was like 85, 86. And The Phantom Menace, I think, was 94. So 12 years, 18 years. Math is hard. What is that? That's only 8 years between them. But in the storyline, it jumps back 20 years. So it's both. It's forward in time. It took a long time to go back 20 years. And I think what happened, honestly, I said at the beginning, Lucas took the best parts of his story. When he started making the first three parts of the story, we all realized, yeah, you really did take the best parts of the story. We've seen the best parts already.
Well, it's also one of those things, you think about a band who gets a recording contract. They've had their whole existence to come up with that first set of songs, and sometimes it's enough to do a couple of albums, but eventually it's like, okay, if we've exhausted all of our material and we have an album due next year. So and in a lot of ways he spent his whole career before for Star Wars, and he was like, oh crap, now I got to follow it up. But one of the best things about the second three, well, of course the best thing is Weird Al's song. Just Man, it was awesome. His song about my this little Anakin guy, maybe Vader someday later. I love, it's one of my favorite songs. But I read this article on the internet, and I can't find it anymore, where it talked about Jar Jar Binks was guilty of war crimes, and he needed to be prosecuted as a wartime criminal because he suggested the act that caused the rebellion to break out, and therefore, and this was like kind of along the same times of, and it was a veiled thing, attack at George Bush, saying he should be charged for war crimes for the Iraqi war, but it was just Jar Jar Binks was a war criminal and needed to be prosecuted as such, was really one of the greatest things I had ever read, and it made Jar Jar. It made me accept Jar Jar as a beloved Star Wars character, to think of him being tried and committed and executed of war crimes.
Yeah, it's a great fan theory that Jar Jar is actually like the most evil Sith Lord of all of them. And that, he's the one that creates all the stuff. He's the one that kicks off the war with the Gungans. It's all him. And Lucas plays it off as him being bumbling. But this fan theory is like, what if he's not bumbling? What if he's planning all of this? It's a great, I'm sure you could find a YouTube video on it. To correct my numbers, Return of the Jedi came out in 83, Phantom Menace in 99. So a 16-year gap between the two. Definitely long enough for all of us to grow up and become pseudo-adults. I was beginning my adult life while I had the opportunity to relive some of my childhood, and it just kind of didn't work.
But just imagine the technological advancement between 1983 and 1999.
Right.
I mean, that's like the first IBM PC versus, the first iMac. It's a totally amazing thing. You can imagine what you could do in Hollywood with that technology.
Well, and Lucas tried, and it just didn't work as well as he'd hoped it would. And then when they came out with the revamped, the special edition versions of it, where they took this old footage of, I remember groaning audibly as I watched Han Solo step over the tail of Jabba the Hutt on his way to the Millennium Falcon, and how just terrible that bit of film looked, and thinking, Lucas, just stop. You need to stop killing my childhood. And George Lucas never stopped killing our childhood. Every time he made an addition or a change, it was almost always for the worse. When he came out with the re-release of them, and there's like 30 seconds of Darth Vader saying no, no, no before he throws the Emperor down the tube, and it didn't add to the story. It didn't make anything better. It didn't sound like James Earl Jones, and there was no reason to have done it, other than to just make me hate my childhood. I honestly can't understand why Lucas wouldn't stop monkeying with his own creation. And at some point, it's not his creation, it's our creation, right? When you get so big, like Harry Potter doesn't belong to J.K. Rowling anymore. It belongs to all of us, and she has to bend to our will, and Lucas just could never accept that reality.
I would not disagree with you. No, I remember, and I mean, think about it. Movies that the last movie had came out over 10 years before, and they're releasing them on it might have been the 10th anniversary of that. I remember they re-released them all in the theaters, and they won the box office because you're re-releasing films that were made a generation ago, and they're better than anything coming out at the time. And to take advantage of the new, they digitized the footage that they could with the better sound, and and people they kind of started the marathons. They were doing 1, 2, and 3 back to back, and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it was the 20th anniversary. It was 1997, May 25th, 1997. The original release date of the first one was May 25th, 1977. And I remember standing in line for a couple of hours. It wasn't an all-day thing, but I stood in line to get my tickets. It was before we could buy tickets online for the re-release of Star Wars, because I wanted to relive that part of my childhood. I wanted to see it on the big screen. I'd seen it on TV, and I owned the videotapes and that sort of stuff. But I wanted to see it on the big screen again in a way that it had never been presented before. Because even like you said earlier, the big screens back in the day couldn't compare to the giant stadium seating venues that we have today. And I felt robbed. I felt like Lucas was torturing my childhood by not giving me the thing that I paid to see. I paid to see the thing I loved, and he gave me the thing I loved, but changed a little.
If you love that one, you'll hate this one. So, and I remember kind of going back to the first three. There was a while where there was a new Star Trek or Star Wars book that came out every month. And it continued the story from Return of the Jedi. You know, there was, I think her name was Marla Jade. I'm sorry, I haven't read the books in over 20 years. One of them was The Truths at Bakar, where the remnants of the Empire and the rebels had to come together to fight off this other thing. And it was like you got to advance the story. And then, of course, they were all canon up until Disney said, forget that stuff. And but there was so much, you know, because you got the books and there were comic books of them and all of that. And, of course, you know, White and Nerdy even brings the Christmas special in, if you can, you know, where he goes and buys the Christmas special from the dealer. I tell you, Weird Al had to be a true Star Wars fan. He does so much for the community.
Yeah, that's something we haven't talked about much, but during this whole 25 years plus, I mean, it's still today. So for the 40 years that Star Wars has been around, there's been about a book a month coming out in this Star Wars universe. You know, different authors, some authorized, some unauthorized, some fan fiction, some, you know, but that whole culture has just been living on, and I haven't been a part of it at all. I haven't read any of the Star Wars books. I have the Star Wars pop-up book from the movie from when I was 5 years old. But that's the only Star Wars book I've ever purchased or read. But yeah, there's this whole thing where these characters are being developed, this whole plot lines that were alluded to in the movies have been fully developed. We learn a little bit about what the Kessel Run is and what it means to make it in 12 parsecs, you know, that sort of thing. And that's all sort of just been under the undercurrent, under the waves of the cinematic world until, you know, the episode 1, 2, and 3 had run their course, and now there was nothing. There was nothing on the screen for Star Wars fans for, again, a period of time, and those book things started to step in there. And the Clone Wars first came to the big screen for a very short while, but then really picked up on television and on Netflix. The Clone Wars series sort of picked up that mantle, and we learn about these lesser-known Star Wars characters, and it still has a huge cult following today. And I don't think that that we would have gotten The Force Awakens had the Clone Wars not done so well in their own way.
Now, did you know there were two separate Clone Wars?
I did, yes.
Yeah, and there's this neat fan theory on the internet that one of them was like true history and the other one was propaganda put out by the Old Republic. Like the original one that was like the 6-episode miniseries or whatever was like kind of historical, and the one that was with the really good animation and all that was this you know, it was propaganda put out by the Republic to justify the militarization of the Empire. And it was, I mean, it's a compelling story, but one of the things, oh man, I forgot what it was. Say something else, Mark, or Miles. Miles, we haven't heard much from you. What do you think about all of this?
I've always, look, I mean, I only ever saw the first movie, and that was in the 70s. And ever since then, it just seems to have been a battle between Star Wars fans and Star Trek fans. And I got to the point where anytime somebody put the word star in something, I just immediately recoiled. So that was kind of where I was at. And it's probably a pity because it's probably something that I missed. I think of somebody who didn't follow this all the way through the early movies and then through into the rest of it. It's a huge bar to get over to try to re-immerse yourself into something which is owned effectively, as you rightly said, by the fans. I even think, you know, I was listening to what you were saying then, and I thought, you know, if I went back and I watched all these movies back from the start, I still don't think I'd get it, because I think you have had to have been on that train ride with all the other fans during the time to really appreciate it. And the details that would have been obvious wouldn't be obvious to me at this point. So I have to sit back as a spectator and admire the passion that's behind it, because I think it's great.
Yeah, there's something about people who are of our age, mid 40s, who understood the zeitgeist that Star Wars broke through. And, we were at that young age where it captured our imaginations. And then we're also of the same age where the internet got popular and fan films became accessible to everybody. One of the greatest is one of the earliest ones. It's called Troopers. And it's a story. It's set like, cops, and you have the Bad Boys logo, and it's these Imperial troopers pulling duty on this out of the way planet, and they meet this couple who has an abusive husband and all of that, and it really kind of sets the mood of what happened. It's a different telling of what happened at Luke's aunt and uncle's house, and it was great. It was awesomely done, and there's been so much fan fiction, and now you can get on a desktop computer, you can do graphics as well as, or really in some cases even better than the original films, and it can look really good on not much of a budget, and there's been some really good ones out there.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's part of why for me, the Star Wars was one of the really first democratic things that I could do. The toys that Kenner produced were small and they were cheap. And I grew up so poor. I refer to it frequently, but I mean, I was in the depths of poverty like you don't understand. Like we didn't always eat every day, but we had Star Wars toys. A couple of them. I had a Luke Skywalker and a Darth Vader. I think they came in a kit of 4 for about $8, which $8 back then is about 30-ish today. But they were cheap enough that even the dirt poor kid had Star Wars figures. And as this generation grew older and we began to play with technology and making fan films and making our own stuff like that, we returned back to our childhood. If we're going to make a film, a stop motion animation for YouTube, well, why not dig up one of those Star Wars figures that we've got still in the case somewhere? So I think Miles, you're right. You kind of had to be the right place, the right time. And while you could never feel the same passion that I do about it, I think you could enjoy it. As an outsider, like for me, I came to the Harry Potter the same way. I didn't grow up in that, but I read the books because I wanted to have some understanding of all those people that did grow up in it. But I mean, Lucasfilm I don't remember the date, 2012, 2016, somewhere around there. I could Google it, but I'm talking. Sold the Disney franchise, or sold the Lucasfilm franchise to Disney for $4 billion. Think about that for just a moment. George Lucas is a billionaire because of this string of movies with bad acting and poor dialogue. That's not about the art. That's about the way it captured the imagination. And Disney wouldn't have done that, like I said earlier, if it hadn't been this thriving community. It's there. Somebody's going to be making stuff, right? The fan films are going to be made. The books are going to be made. They might as well get a piece of that action. And so it was worth $4 billion to them. $4 billion to them to remake it. And so they came out with The Force Awakens, and everybody of my generation was just squeeing about it. Yay, Star Wars! And I'm just so happy that we're having these conversations again. That's what I said, with whether The Force Awakens is good or bad, people are talking about Star Wars again, and that makes me happy. And what does Star Wars Force Awakens do? It makes $1 billion. They got 25% of their investment back in one movie. That's not going to happen again, as we've seen. Rogue One was sort of like an episode 3.5. It's a new film in the Star Wars canon universe. That's exciting. And then the Revenge of the Sith is sort of the last of that Skywalker dynasty. We end that story. And now there's a whole new realm of Star Wars fan fiction out there to be made, but it's going to be made with $1 billion budget. And so that's exciting. But, the next two films, Rogue One and Episode 8, didn't make $1 billion. But they're still, I don't think Disney is unhappy with the choice they made at this point.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, I think Rogue One is the reason why I'm ultimately okay with Disney buying them, because, The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi were, in some ways, they're kind of letdowns, but for me, Rogue One, they knocked it out of the park. There was enough humor. and enough, it had, you have the banter, you have the action, you have the sacrifice. Spoiler alert, people die in Rogue One. It's been out long enough. It was like, oh, I can't, yes. And so The Force Awakens was, and I mean, The Last Jedi, there was enough twist in the movie to get me over the fact that this is a frame for frame remake of The Empire Strikes Back. But, and there's just so many plot holes in there that, the film almost literally falls apart because the holes almost just rip the film to pieces. But not bad. But like I say, Rogue One was the film, the 7-8-year-old in me who's like, what happened? Why is that shit being fired upon? It's like, oh, that's why. Yes. So
yeah. The first three, episode 4, 5, and 6 were, it was a space western, a space opera, that sort of thing. Lots of action. Episodes 1, 2, and 3 were economy lessons in space. It was the whole thing. The whole plot was about a trade negotiation. And then The Force Awakens was just kind of, it was a handoff. I've got your childhood. I'm going to take it delicate. Like when a new parent hands their baby to somebody else for the first time, you want to make sure they get the head just right. You want to make sure they hold it. And that's what the Force Awakens was. It was the new guy saying, I'm going to hold your baby, and I'm going to hold it just right, and I'm going to take care of it. It wasn't anything daring. It wasn't anything exciting, but it gave us the us in that generation that sense of confidence. Okay, I can leave my baby with this guy. He knows what he's doing. And then Rogue One was just plumbing the depths. And I think there's just billions and billions to be made there. Disney could release another 50 movies like Rogue One. None of them will be huge, but they'll make money on every one of them. And I'll pay to see every one of them. And there's a whole bunch of people like me that'll do that. That you just I'm like a dog in that respect. No matter how hard you kick me, I'm going to come back the next time. Because this is part of my world.
Do you think there's a risk that they would ever dilute the value of this franchise by creating a really, really, really bad Star Wars movie that people just freak out about?
If the Star Wars Christmas special couldn't do it, I don't think it can be done. That was such a terrible piece of trash, and I own it. It's become a collector's edition. So one really bad movie, no. 3 really bad movies in a row, then yeah, the fickle fans are going to say, what have you done? I trusted you with my son, and you turned him into a Sith.
I don't think so, Mark. And has counterpoint. I give you episodes 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
Star Wars survived episodes 1, 2, and 3, and so it could survive a stinker by Disney.
You're right. Because I'm, no matter how much I yell about it, I'm also going to pay $50 to take my wife to see it in IMAX. So yeah, you're right. That they until we start to die, because my children aren't as hooked on it as I am. They enjoy it, and they know Daddy enjoys it. But they're going to have to find a way to capture the next generation if they want to continue this saga. But how many stories live for 5 decades? How many franchises of any kind make it that long? So if it fails today and falls apart and there's never another good Star Wars movie made, it was a pretty good run.
There are a few examples of that historically. I mean, things like Tolkien is probably the one that comes to mind that has lasted, decades and decades beyond him. But yeah, and Doctor Who is another example of something that started in the 60s and still thrives today.
Right. And Star Trek, there are a handful of them, but just a handful.
Star Trek, yeah. But you're right, it's a handful, and any corporation that can get their hands on one of those is running all the way to the bank in glee. So yeah, this is a phenomenon.
I mean, to jump track for just a second, CBS is so confident in Star Trek fans that they've made that the reason that you'll purchase CBS All Access, and it's working. People are buying CBS All Access just so they can watch Star Trek Discovery. When you find that kind of loyalty in a fan base, you really have to do a lot to abuse it. And so far Disney hasn't made any big missteps. took my kids to Disney a few years ago. That was before this big deal, but Disney and Lucasfilm had already been working together. They have a whole Star Wars, section of the park, and they're expanding that now. And Vader is still there. That's the amazing thing. All these years later, Emperor, and Snoke, and names are just running out of my head. Emo Vader. None of these guys have matched the loyalty and the fierceness of Darth Vader. Darth Vader was the ultimate badass, and I don't know that anybody's ever going to be as good as he was.
Yeah, I mean, but dude, you think about that. How was he? Because one, you never got to see him, so it was that imagination,
right?
And then you just had the voice of James Earl Jones just booming that bass and just terrifying people, and you digitize that to make it sound a little more fierce and rough. Who is going to do that? Because, so I don't know. Yeah. Emo Ren. Yeah. He's not that terrifying. So,
the most terrifying 2 minutes of Darth Vader's entire career is at the end of Rogue One.
Yes.
When the Emperor sends his dog in to collect those plans. And he fails because Vader's entire life is about failure. But at that point, I mean, my daughter went, oh, my God. that he was really that bad, wasn't he? And, we all just sort of had that sense from the books and the other culture like that. He was never really that tough on screen. But that moment there, that was when Vader has his moments. And I think for me, that was one of the things that made Rogue One so great. Again, it was that nod to my childhood. The whole thing was, it was very reminiscent of the Millennium Falcon and all of that. But when they gave Vader his due, and I hope that there's going to be more of that. They're doing they're plumbing back in that story. They're doing the Han Solo. He gets a solo movie coming in the near future. And I hope that as they plumb those depths of unmined data that Vader is going to play a big role there. Now we've got to find another voice for him because James Earl Jones doesn't sound like he did a few years ago. But we can work around that. But I hope that we get to see Vader really being a tough guy. We saw the birth of Vader, and then we saw sort of the fall of Vader, but we never really saw that 2 decades of him being a menace to the entire galaxy in between.
True enough.
And we seem to have run out of steam.
Sorry. It happens.
It's all right. It's better to let it die a natural death than to try to prolong it. So, Seth, I will simply say, what happened this week in history?
All right, Mark. Well, on February the 1st, 1982, the 286 processor is introduced. The Intel 8286 processor is introduced in 6 and 8 megahertz versions. Get that, 6 and 8 megahertz. It was employed for the IBM PC and introduced in 1984, and then widely used in most of the PC-compatible computers until the early 1990s. The 286, as it was most commonly called, paved the way for the PC, and later on Mac caved in as well as we know it today. However, it was not without its problems, and Bill Gates famously referred to 286 as a brain-dead chip, since it was clear that the new Microsoft Windows environment would not be able to run multiple MS-DOS applications with the 286. It was also arguably responsible for the split between Microsoft and IBM, since IBM insisted that OS2, originally a joint venture between IBM and Microsoft, would run on a 286. And Mark, that happened this week in history, and now back to you.
Yeah, so that if you're not a supercomputer nerd, you don't understand the computer naming infrastructure. So first was the 8088 chips, and then they were superseded by the 8086 chips. That doesn't seem to make much sense. You stepped down and you got faster, but you did. And then it was the 8286 and the 8386, and at that point, we stopped calling them 80-somethings. They were just 386, 486, 586, and then Intel was so good at branding the 586 as the Pentium, every chip thereafter has been the Pentium from then on. We're on the 14th generation Pentium, so it would really be like the 1786 or something like that, but we don't use that nomenclature anymore. But it's funny that IBM was really pushing this one hard, and Microsoft wanted to be IBM, but the chip just didn't have the infrastructure it needed. It didn't last long. The 386 supplanted it pretty quickly.
I've got a PC AT out in the garage, and I've got, a regular 5151 PC and an XT. And that AT, we had them back in the 80s, just, as a regular computer to write software on for customers and so on. But it was like wider than the original PC. And it just looked, I don't know, it didn't look badass enough for me. I mean, it was just IBM and wider. And now, funny thing is, I was looking at that thing the other day going, man, I think I might gut that computer, put in a modern motherboard and runs Linux on it, just as a sort of a, testimonial back to the day. But even doing that, it's not badass looking enough. So I'll just leave it in its vintage original form. But yeah, that 286 was a bit of a meh. I mean, the 8088 or 8086 chipset was pretty good. And, all the software ran on it and was, had to run to the clock speed of the chips. And you put it on a faster chip and all of a sudden your games are going into hyper crazy mode and you couldn't play them. So
right.
286, that became a business level chipset. I think businesses bought ATs. They didn't, the home users didn't bother about it. They stayed with the old stuff. And then eventually they just jumped into the 386.
I remember in that transition time from 286 to 386, I had some games back in the old Wolf City High School computer lab that were not exactly graphical games, but not really text either. Sort of that phantom zone in between where they were sort of ASCII-ish graphics. And when we made that switch from the 286 to the 386, those games just didn't work anymore. It was too fast. And I discovered a program. I don't know how. Maybe it was a bulletin board. There certainly was no internet back then. But later, when I wanted to run those old programs on modern stuff, 386 and 46, I discovered a program called Moslo, M-O-S-L-O, Moslo. And what Moslo did was give your PC like intricate floating point calculations to do, and then launch your program. So it would slow your PC down to the point where you could play those old games. Because there was no clock back then. It was everything was paced to the cycles of the CPU. So as the CPU got faster, the games got faster. Now everything's based on a clock, and it's not really an issue. But back then, there wasn't that. You just however long it took your computer to step from one instruction to the next is how long it took. And so Moslo came to the rescue. Remember the turbo button? The only purpose of the turbo button was to make your computer slower. It was improperly named, right? You push the turbo button and it runs at normal speed. You turn it off and it runs at like half speed.
Yeah, this one goes to 11.
Right, but my software can only handle 5.5, so I'm going to push the turbo button.
Cool.
Oh, yeah.
Trips down memory lane.
It's a big red button. So anyway, all right. Now, Seth, what do you have to lower my productivity, thus making you look like a better hiring option?
All right. Well, Mark, have you ever wondered what it would be like to have a nightlight inside your commode so that you could see where you were aiming? Well, if you've never wondered that question, I wonder why not. So you can go to getglobal.io and you can purchase a nightlight for your commode on the inside that has a sensor on the outside, so it's motion activated, and it even has an air freshener. I mean, this way it's easy to clean. It helps you sleep better at night. Kids will love it. They'll be begging you to potty train them so they can go to the bathroom. It fits every toilet and it works out of the box. Getglobal.io. You can even go /offer-01 for all of your nighttime relieving needs. Mark, do you need your bowl to glow? If so, then this offer's for you.
Well, sometimes you don't want to turn on the light, and the wife gets mad when there's a misfire. So I can see there's a market for this. I actually have seen this before. I think it was on Shark Tank.
Yes, yeah. It was.
And then there was another one that projects images down. So like you could project an image of your boss and then pee on your boss.
I think it's a great practical joke. Oh, I'd love to play this one with my wife. She wouldn't even any idea, and then oh yeah, I'm all in.
But yeah, I mean, it has the benefits because it's a softer, not as bright light as your regular bathroom light. So if you just have to make a quick trip to the bathroom, you don't ruin your kind of night effect by that bright light. Just stumble down the hallway, walk in the bathroom, this glow, and you're going to look down. So that way, how many videos have you seen where there's a snake waiting in your toilet bowl to bite you when you sit down? Well, when the light comes on, you're automatically going to look down and see. So this is a practical. Sorry, I can't go anymore.
All right, and on that note, this is the part of the show where I tell you how you can contact us and let us know what you think about Seth's glowing toilet bowl or Star Trek or Star Wars or anything else that we've talked about. You can go to elementop.com, click the Contact Us button at the top of the page, fill out the world's hardest CAPTCHA, fill out the form there, and then that sends an email that gets priority in my inbox. We appreciate. I've had lots of feedback recently of people just saying, "Yay, we're glad you're back," and that's awesome. And then other people are like canceling their eBay or PayPal payments and canceling their Patreon payments. So there's been mixed reaction to the fact that we're back, but hey, any feedback is good feedback, so we appreciate it. I'm happy to read your email that says we're glad you're back, but I'd also like to see some suggestions, some ideas, some guests that you might want to have on the show. So we appreciate anything you have to say. Go to elementop.com, click the Contact Us button, or you can dial 559-IMOP and leave us a voicemail on your Google Voice box, on our Google Voice email, and we'll probably play it on the show because we haven't had one of those in a while. So, I'm sorry, I'm really having a hard time tonight. We love to hear what you have to say, and now it's time to just say thanks, everybody, for hanging out with us. We appreciate, we do appreciate you. I mean, that seems like a silly thing to say, but it's true. We don't get a lot out of doing this show other than the thanks and the appreciation, right? There's not a whole lot of money coming in. There's not, nobody's going to recognize me walking down the street and offer to do whatever famous people do. What we get out of it is your appreciation. So we do appreciate it when you let us know what you think. And now, Miles, Seth, any final words of wisdom for tonight?
Go Super Bowl-ish, maybe.
You know what? I will add one thing in. We had I cannot remember his name. We had a gentleman in December, I think it was, who put a suggestion in because I was whining that my tablet battery was dying and I needed a new tablet, and made a suggestion to get a Lenovo tablet. Well, I took him up on that. I bought one. And I've got to tell you, 6 weeks later, I love that thing. So whoever you were, I can't remember your name. Big props. Thank you for that. Good suggestion. So see, listener feedback works.
It does. And in a future show, we're going to be talking about our gadget reviews, the things we got for Christmas, the things that we've been looking at recently. So I look forward to hearing about that Lenovo tablet then.
Cool.
For now, I'll remind you, Patreon, patreon.com/elementop is a place that you can go and you can pay for play, right? You subscribe there, X amount of money per show. Every time I put out a show, you give me that much money. It's the simplest, most pure form of financing this show. There's, I've had the PayPal thing for a while. That's, X dollars a month no matter what. But then there's no pressure on me to put out a show. You're paying me no matter what. But this I really like. I don't get paid unless I produce content. And then you decide what that content's worth. $1, $2, $50. That'd be awesome. $50 per show. That'd be super awesome. I look forward to that. But that's the most direct way to support the show. Patreon.com/elementop. And now I'll say good night, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us. And remember, pay for what you like.
Blue.
All right. So we should have come in right at 49 or so minutes there.
Yeah, I think it's right on the 50. Excellent.
I thought that went well.
Yeah. I'm just happy that the computer didn't blow up. Stupid thing. Anyway.
All right, YouTube people, I'm going to say goodnight to you now. See you later.